train for 16 hours and kill any black belt. Now what I see is that what I focus on is reality combat on the streets. I don't train for entertainment. I don't train for combat sport. Now, the ultimate out there of what is control of everything, aside whatever religious beliefs you have, aside from God or whatever the case may be, aside from nature, what governs the society is the law. So the law is the ultimate out there. It's not UFC. It's not the boxing judges. It's not the rules and regulations that you see in combat sport. The law governs all of combat sport. The only reason why there is such a thing as combat sport is because the law allows it. If the law said, hey, you know what, we're going to ban boxing, we're going to ban cage fighting, then there wouldn't be such a thing and you wouldn't even know about it. The law is above combat sport. The only thing that the law is not above is nature and God, if you believe in God. But other than that, the law is in control out there of our lives. So the law says, hey, you know, you're allowed to have guns in your home. Then that becomes our reality when it comes to defending ourselves if somebody tries to invade our homes. We have this method to defend our homes. These firearms, we can use these tools to defend ourselves. Now, the law has stepped in and said, hey, you know, you can get a concealed carry permit in 16 hours of training. So that means they're saying that you can carry a gun with you as long as you go through this 16-hour training course. It's only 16 hours. So basically, they're turning a white belt into a black belt in 16 hours. The average martial arts school, even Taekwondo, will make you train for at least a year to get a black belt. But no, we think that's kind of pushing it. We think, how could somebody become a black belt in just a year? Well, you got the lawmakers in the state of Illinois that are certifying people to pretty much become black belts, a lethal weapon, in 16 hours. Not even 1 year, but in 16 hours. So the law has already dictated this. They've already made the decisions and they passed it. So that's what it is. So basically, people could get to kill any black belt out there in 16 hours of training. And that's the reality. So, all this nonsense with all these so-called martial artists and these fighters debating on what technique is more effective than which and which style is better than which style, you know what? This is all child's play. I'll say that these people are ignorant. They're dumb. They're focusing on the wrong thing. The reality are these firearms. And the laws revolve around the use of these firearms. And these people that get these firearms can just kill all these so-called martial artists and all these fighters with ease, with the pull of a trigger. And that's the reality of it. And I choose to train in reality, not in fantasy. So, this is the reality. In 16 hours of training, you can kill any black belt. Now, if these so-called martial artists, if they want to train in a reality-based combative situation, they need to step into the realm of the firearms. If they refuse to do that, they are living in their own fantasy, boosting their own ego. Oh, I've been training for 20 years, I'm such a lethal weapon. But then you've been training for 20 years, and then somebody trained 16 hours could kill you easily with just a pull of a trigger. And that's 16 hours of training because they chose to follow the law. They choose to legally get that firearm to kill the person. But there are a lot of people out there that don't follow the law that will obtain firearms illegally, so they don't even need to go 16 hours of training. They will just kill them just with no training whatsoever. And that's the reality. There are people out there that will not follow the law that could kill the black belt in an instant, and there's people that will follow the law that could kill the black belt in an instant. So either way, these black belts, so-called black belts, are worthless according to the modern society with the modern technology. I see that in modern day combat, how you train and what you train is dictated by the law as far as what is the most efficient. The only reason that there are no swords around on the streets is because the law made it against the law to carry the swords out in public. But if the law said it's okay for people to carry katanas in public as a way of self-defense, then the way of the samurai, the way of kendo, all the martial arts that were focused around the use of the swords would be the ultimate martial arts. But the law stopped that. The law came and said, no, you're not allowed to carry swords out in public. So that turned that entire method of training to be impractical, inefficient. The law comes in and says it's against the law to carry nunchucks out in public. That in itself already turned the way of combat with the use of nunchucks to be inefficient, impractical. The law is governing how martial artists are enabled to express themselves in public in order to defend themselves from great danger. But the law now, even though they banned nunchucks, even though they banned throwing stars, even though they banned batons, even though they banned swords, even though they banned brass knuckles, they have recently made changes to allow the use of firearms, which is the ultimate weapon out of them all, to be used in public as long as you follow these guidelines. So that becomes the ultimate way of self-defense, beyond these silly techniques that you learn in these so-called martial arts schools. The real martial arts will adapt according to what the law determines and according to nature. That's the real martial arts. The real martial arts follows nature as number one, and then the law is number two. Combat sport is just focused around sporting regulations, which has nothing to do with the reality of how real combat is. That's far from the reality of how real combat is. So really, the people that are training in martial arts that are so focused on the fighting aspect, they are wasting their time. Because if they're in there solely for the fighting aspect, they are wasting their time. If they're in so much, if they are so intrigued by what is the most effective method of self-defense, they need to step into the realm of firearms, because that's where the real martial arts is. Because that's the reality of what is out there. That is the most effective, by far. And based on what the law determines, will dictate when you can and cannot use this firearm. And then the training needs to be revolved around those regulations in order to be a law-abiding citizen. But if you choose to not be a law-abiding citizen, that's a different story. But the fact of the matter is, it's either the way of nature or the way, or adapting to what the law dictates. That's going to be the methods of the real martial arts. Not the garbage that you see in the cage or in the ring. That is not real. And if you think that's real, you're living in a fantasy. It's like pretending that guns don't exist, or other methods don't, other weapons don't exist. That's far from the reality. Real martial artists train in reality-based combat, not on fantasy. And the more lethal that it gets, when you talk about the use of these firearms, it trains your psychology to get used to seeing that you don't fight over ego. Unless you're willing to die over the ego, which is ridiculous in itself. A lot of the training boils down to control of the ego and being able to walk away from a situation rather than aggravate a situation to become potentially violent. So a lot of it has to deal with humbleness and a non-competitive mentality when it comes to dealing with people in the public, which they're clearly not teaching properly in the combat sport. And that could get these people in a lot of trouble out here in the real world.